Thousands of you left a comment on the last video telling me the same thing. You said, Eli, that tree does not grow in my state, and you were right. So I went back, I drove to Holmes County. I sat with two families I have known for years, and I asked them one question: what grows everywhere? What they showed me is older, simpler, and thrives in every climate in the United States, including yours. There is a plant that produces over 100 gallons of fuel per acre. It grows from Florida to North Dakota. It needs no refinery, no pipeline, and no permission from anyone. The Amish have been pressing it into oil for generations, feeding the leftover meal to their animals and running their equipment on it, while the rest of us stood in line at the gas station. The reason you have never heard about this system is documented in a book called The Forbidden Fuel, A History of Power Alcohol, published in 1983, that names every company and every lobbyist who paid to keep it from you. The first time I saw it working was in a shed outside Sugar Creek, Ohio. A man named Samuel had a hand press bolted to a workbench, a 5-gallon bucket underneath catching golden oil, and a diesel generator running in the corner with no smell and no smoke. I asked him where his fuel came from. He did not point at a gas station. He pointed at the field behind his barn. Sunflowers, 6 rows of sunflowers growing along the fence line, planted in May, harvested in September, pressed in October. And before this video is over, I am going to show you something that happened in a small town in Kansas in 1938, something involving 2,000 gas stations across 8 states. That will change how you see every gallon of fuel you have ever purchased in your life. That detail alone is worth staying to the end. But first, you need to understand why this plant works so well, why it was deliberately buried, and why it matters right now, even if you already own a home and have no intention of farming a single acre of land. Here is the part that nobody told you, and I mean nobody. You heard me mention in the last video that Rudolf Diesel demonstrated his engine at the Paris World Exhibition in 1900 running on peanut oil. What I did not tell you last time was what happened in the decades after that demonstration, because what happened next is the part they worked the hardest to erase from every textbook and every fuel conversation in this country. 8 years after Diesel showed the world an engine running on vegetable oil, Henry Ford released the Model T. That car was designed from day one to run on ethanol or gasoline, either one. The driver chose. Ford did not hide this fact. He told the New York Times in 1925 that the fuel of the future would come from fruit, weeds, sawdust, almost anything that grows. He said it publicly, and he meant every word. He put his own money behind it. And he was not the only brilliant mind saying the same thing. Alexander Graham Bell, the man who invented the telephone, wrote in National Geographic magazine in 1917 that alcohol was a beautiful, clean, and efficient fuel, and that we would never need to fear running out of energy as long as we could produce a crop. Two of the most famous inventors in American history looked at the same future and saw the same answer. A country where farmers grew their own fuel, where energy independence was not a political slogan but a garden chore, where no tanker crossed an ocean and no pipeline crossed a state line to keep your tractor running in the morning. That future was not a dream. It was already being constructed in the American Midwest. By 1937, a company called Agro had opened a production plant in Atchison, Kansas. They blended ethanol, made from American grain, into motor fuel, 2 grades, Agrol 5 and Agrol 10, backed by Henry Ford himself and the Chemical Foundation. At its peak in 1938, Agro fuel was available at over 2,000 service stations across 8 Midwestern states. 2,000 stations, from Indiana to South Dakota to Iowa to Nebraska. The slogan was, "Try a tankful, you will be thankful." The plant in Atchison was producing 18 million gallons of ethanol a year. Farmers were buying it, everyday drivers were buying it. The fuel worked. The engines ran clean. The economics made sense for the people growing the grain and the people filling their tanks, but it did not make sense for Standard Oil. Standard Oil, the empire John D. Rockefeller built by controlling 90% of American oil refining by 1880, had spent decades making sure no alternative could compete. Their strategy was never to make a better product, Their strategy was to destroy every competitor before it could gain a foothold. And when Agro showed up at 2,000 pumps with a fuel that worked, Standard Oil declared war. The tactics are documented in congressional records and academic histories. The National Petroleum Association called ethanol fuel an outrage against common sense. They spread a campaign claiming that allowing ethanol at gas stations would turn every filling pump into a potential speakeasy, playing on lingering fears from prohibition. They pressured legislators in every Midwestern state capital and in Washington. They killed 19 federal bills and 31 state bills on alcohol fuel between 1,933 and 1,939. And when legislation failed to stop Agro, they turned to the most brutal weapon in their arsenal, price dumping. They dropped the price of leaded gasoline to match Agro penny for penny. Agro sold at 17 cents a gallon. Standard Oil pushed their leaded fuel down to 16 cents, not because gasoline cost that little to refine, because Standard Oil could afford to lose money for years and a startup in Kansas could not. And here is the detail that makes it personal. The fuel Standard Oil was pushing at 16 cents a gallon to undercut Agro was leaded gasoline. They knew lead was toxic. The health risks were documented in the early 1920s. Workers at refineries producing tetraethyl lead were getting sick, losing their minds, and dying. The Surgeon General held hearings on it, but Standard Oil kept selling leaded fuel for 50 more years because adding lead was cheaper than blending ethanol as an anti-knock agent. Ethanol would have done the same job without poisoning a single person. But ethanol came from farms. Lead came from refineries they already owned. The managers at the Agro plant went on record accusing the oil industry of sabotage, propaganda, and deliberate economic warfare. By 1939, Agro closed its doors, not because the fuel failed, not because drivers rejected it, because it could not survive a price war against the wealthiest corporation the world had ever seen, while that corporation simultaneously lobbied every legislature in the Midwest to block support for ethanol. But here is the part that should stop you cold. 3 years after they helped kill Agro, the United States entered a rubber crisis during World War II. The military desperately needed synthetic rubber for tires, engine gaskets, raincoats, hoses, everything that kept the war machine running. And where did the government turn? They reopened the exact same ethanol plants they had helped destroy. The same chemists who designed the Agro facility in Atchison, including a man named Leo Christensen, went back to work producing ethanol for aviation fuel and synthetic Buna S rubber. By 1944, 3/4 of all synthetic rubber produced in America came from Midwestern corn ethanol plants. The same fuel the petroleum industry called an outrage against common sense was literally winning the war. And when the war ended in 1945, they shut those plants down again. Every single one. The infrastructure dismantled. The knowledge shelved. The farmers sent back to buying someone else's fuel. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a budget decision made by men who understood exactly what farm fuel could do and decided it was more profitable to make sure you never found out. Now, let me show you the plant that changes everything. And I mean everything. The sunflower. Not a garden decoration, not something your grandmother grew for looks along the driveway. An industrial fuel crop that has been hiding in plain sight on American farms for over a century. Here are the numbers, and they are from university research, not from a blog. Sunflower seeds contain 40 to 42% oil by weight. The best varieties push past 45%. Compare that to soybeans at around 18 to 20%. More than double the oil content per seed. 1 acre of oilseed sunflowers in good conditions produces between 1,300 and 2,000 pounds of seed. Press those seeds and you get somewhere between 35 and 105 gallons of raw oil from a single acre, depending on growing conditions and your press efficiency. A farmer in western Wisconsin documented the high end of that range, 2,000 pounds of seed per acre, 48% oil content, 76% extraction rate. That equals 105 gallons of fuel from 1 acre of sunflowers. That is not a theoretical model. That is a field result from a real man on a working farm. And according to the Farm Energy Extension Program, sunflower oil yields are consistently superior to soybean for biodiesel, often producing double or triple the fuel per acre. The sunflower is a drought-tolerant crop with a deep root system. It grows in a wide variety of soil conditions. It can be planted in late spring and harvested by early fall in most regions. Hybrids exist that mature in under 90 days. Now here is the connection to the Amish that most people miss entirely. Cornell University Small Farms published a detailed report on oilseed farming that includes a direct reference to Amish practice. The Amish feed sunflower meal and oil to their horses. That is what gives them those healthy, shiny coats you notice when you drive through Lancaster County or Holmes County. The Amish know this plant. They have always known it. They press the seeds. They burn the oil. They feed the leftover meal to their livestock. Zero waste. The oil goes in one direction. The high-protein cake goes in another. Nothing is thrown away. Nothing requires a factory or a shipment from overseas. A farmer named John Williamson at State Line Farm in North Bennington, Vermont, has been growing oilseed crops for biodiesel since 2004. He farms 40 acres of sunflowers, canola, flax, and mustard. He built a reactor in what he calls his bio barn that processes 400 gallons per batch. He averages 75 gallons of biodiesel per acre. His tractor runs on the fuel he grows in his own fields. He does not buy diesel. He grows it, and the leftover meal feeds his animals and enriches his soil. This man has been doing it for over 20 years in Vermont, one of the coldest states in the country. But sunflowers are not the only option, and this is where the story gets critical for those of you in the far north. Canola produces between 75 and 240 gallons of oil per acre, depending on conditions and variety. That is potentially 3 to 5 times what soybeans produce. It grows exceptionally well in cool climates: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio. These are canola states. Penn State Extension has documented canola as a premier biodiesel crop for Pennsylvania. They have grown 70 acres of canola on university farmland and run their own diesel tractors on canola-based fuel. 1 bushel of canola seed yields just over 2 gallons of fuel. Here is the advantage that matters most if you live where winters are real. Penn State confirmed that canola-based biodiesel has a lower cloud point than biodiesel made from soybeans or animal fats. That means it stays liquid at colder temperatures. It does not gel up in your fuel lines when the thermometer drops below freezing. If you live in a state where January means single digits, canola is your crop. The university proved it in their own equipment. And then there is flaxseed. If you watched my video on wood preservation, you already know this plant. Boiled linseed oil, that is flax. Same plant, same oil, different use. It preserves your fence posts, your barn siding, your deck boards, but that exact same oil also runs in a diesel engine. It also lubricates farm machinery, bearings, and chains. 1 plant, 3 jobs: fuel, wood treatment, and mechanical lubrication. The Amish figured that out a long time before any extension agent wrote it down. All 3 crops, sunflower, canola, and flax, grow in hardiness zones 3 through 8 or wider. That covers every state in the lower 48. Every single one. No exceptions. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You do not need 40 acres. You do not need 20. You do not need a barn or a tractor or a single piece of farm equipment you do not already own. Here is what the system actually looks like for a person with a house and a yard built before 1980. Start with a manual cold press. $60 to $100. It bolts to any workbench or table. You feed dried sunflower seeds in one end. Clear golden oil drips out the bottom into a jar or bucket. The solid seed cake pushes out the other side, and that cake is high protein feed for chickens, goats, or garden compost. The process takes about 30 minutes per batch. The press has no motor, no electronics, and no parts that wear out in a normal lifetime. Samuel showed me one he had been using for 11 years. Same press, same bench. Never replaced a single piece. Cold pressed oil stores for 6 to 12 months in a sealed container, kept out of direct sunlight. You press in the fall after harvest, and you have fuel and lamp oil straight through to the following summer. No freezer, no preservatives, just a sealed bucket in a cool corner of your garage or basement. If you plant a 1/4 acre of oilseed sunflowers along your fence line or in a side lot, a strip of land most people use for absolutely nothing, you can press enough oil in one harvest season to run a kerosene heater through winter, fill oil lamps for emergency lighting during every power outage, lubricate every small engine and piece of machinery in your garage, and blend fuel for any diesel engine on your property. That blend is the part people refuse to believe until they see it with their own eyes. You can mix 20 to 30% raw pressed sunflower oil with standard pump diesel and run it in any diesel engine without a single modification. No conversion kit, no chemistry degree, no special filtration beyond a basic screen. You pour it in and the engine runs. Mythbusters tested this on camera. A diesel car that normally got 33 miles per gallon on petroleum diesel ran at 30 miles per gallon on filtered vegetable oil. 3 miles per gallon difference. The car ran great with no problems. That 3-mile penalty is the cost of total fuel independence for every diesel machine you own. A homesteader in Wisconsin has been mixing cold-pressed sunflower oil with diesel in his farm tractor for years. 105 gallons from 1 acre means he grows enough supplemental fuel in the corner of a single field to power his equipment through an entire planting and harvesting season. One corner, one field, one season. And the sunflowers themselves are improving his soil with their deep root system while they grow. There is no crop on earth that gives you fuel, animal feed, soil improvement, and beauty all at the same time. Except this one. The complete system fuel, heating, water, and every household bill is laid out step by step in the Amish Home System. The link is in the description. But stay here, because what I am about to show you next is the part they work the hardest to erase. Now think about this at a neighborhood scale. 5 families on the same road, each planting a 1/4 acre of sunflowers, that is just over an acre total, press the seeds together one Saturday afternoon, split the oil 5 ways. Every family walks away with enough fuel and lamp oil to reduce their dependence on outside energy for the entire winter. The Amish do not do this alone, they do it together. That is part of the system most people never consider. For those of you with livestock, there is a third system that costs almost nothing to build and nothing to operate: biogas from manure. Penn State Extension documented this extensively. Pennsylvania alone produces 5.5 million tons of cow manure every year. A single dairy cow generates enough waste for 40 cubic feet of net biogas production per day. That gas is methane, chemically identical to the natural gas that arrives through the pipe from your utility company. A simple anaerobic digester built from a 55-gallon drum produces between 200 and 400 liters of cooking gas per month. That is enough to run a kitchen stove daily without paying a gas bill, no electricity required, no moving parts. You feed manure and water in, methane comes out. Some Amish communities in Pennsylvania have already adopted small-scale biodigesters that convert organic waste into biogas for heating and cooking. Pennsylvania has 4 of the longest continuously operating farm-scale digesters in the entire country. They have been running for decades because the system works and it never stops working. So let me put this together for you. Sunflower oil for your diesel engine, your heater, your lamps, and your workshop tools. Canola oil for cold climate fuel that survives a northern winter without gelling. Flax oil for wood preservation, machinery, lubrication, and emergency backup fuel. Biogas from manure for your kitchen stove and household heating. Every one of these systems works with an existing home on existing land. Every one costs less than $100 to begin. Every one has been documented by a land-grant university. And every single one has been standard practice in Amish communities for longer than most of us have been alive. The complete system, fuel, energy, water, heat, is laid out step by step in the Amish Home System guide. The link is in the description below. Now, I want to give you the part I promised at the very beginning. The detail that connects Atchison, Kansas to your fuel bill and to a boardroom in Houston, Texas, and that changes how you look at the entire system. After the Agro plant was shut down in 1939 and reopened and shut down again in 1945, the federal government tracked energy subsidies for the next 6 decades. The General Accounting Office compiled the numbers between 1968 and the year 2000. The United States government gave $150 billion in tax credits and subsidies to the petroleum industry. In that exact same period, the entire farm, fuel, and ethanol industry received $11 billion. $150 billion versus $11 billion. That is not a free market deciding which fuel is cheaper. That is a $139 billion thumb on the scale, paid with your tax money, designed to make petroleum look like the only affordable option while every alternative starved. When someone tells you that pressing your own fuel is not economical, understand what that sentence actually means. It means the math was rigged before you sat down to calculate it. Petroleum looks cheap because your own money was used to make it look cheap, and they knew what they were protecting far beyond the price at the pump. In July of 1977, a senior Exxon scientist named James Black stood before the company's management committee in their corporate headquarters and delivered a presentation that should have changed the world. He told them, using their own data, that carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels was warming the planet. He warned that doubling atmospheric carbon dioxide would raise global temperatures by 2 to 3 degrees. He told those executives that humanity had a window of 5 to 10 years before hard decisions about changing energy strategy would become critical. A year later, he repeated the warning with updated models. Exxon's internal scientists confirmed his projections by 1982 with their own climate models that turned out to be remarkably accurate decades later. Exxon did not develop alternatives. Exxon spent the next 30 years funding organizations that publicly denied the science their own researchers had confirmed. Inside Climate News and Scientific American both documented this from hundreds of pages of internal Exxon memos. The company that knew the truth in 1977 chose to protect quarterly earnings instead. The same pattern repeated like clockwork every time energy independence got close. Standard Oil killed Agro in the 30s. The government revived ethanol plants when they needed them for war and abandoned them the moment the emergency passed. Then, in the 1970s, the oil crisis hit. Gas lines wrapped around city blocks. Prices tripled. Americans were furious. And suddenly, more than 100 new ethanol plants sprang up across the country. Farm fuel was back. It was working. Communities were producing their own energy again. But when petroleum prices dropped artificially in the late 80s and 90s, driven by deliberate overproduction and political maneuvering, most of those plants went bankrupt. The cycle repeated a third time. Build it, prove it works, watch it get buried when the price of oil comes back down. And Exxon's own scientists told the truth in 1977, and the company buried it for 3 decades. Every time farm fuel works, it gets killed, not because it fails, because it succeeds. And because a farmer pressing sunflower oil in his shed does not need a tanker, a pipeline, a refinery, or a quarterly earnings report from anyone. There is a book that documents this entire cycle in meticulous detail. It is called The Forbidden Fuel, A History of Power, Alcohol. It is an academic history, not a pamphlet. It traces every step of the systematic suppression of farm-based fuel from the early 1900s through the modern era. It names the companies, it names the lobby groups, it cites the budget lines. If you want to understand why you have paid for fuel your entire life when the engine in your truck was designed to run on seed oil, that book is the place to start. And consider this. The diesel engine was not named after a fuel, it was named after a man, Rudolf Diesel. He built that engine to run on vegetable oil. That was the original design, that was the intended fuel. But over the last century, the word diesel became synonymous with a petroleum product. They took the inventor's name and attached it to the very substance he was trying to replace. So every time you pull up to a pump and see the word diesel, you are reading the name of a man whose life's work was making sure you would never need that pump in the first place. The fuel bill was never mandatory. It was subsidized with $150 billion of your money over 6 decades. And the system that replaces it has been growing in plain sight the entire time. In Amish fields, in Vermont barns, in university research stations that published their findings and watched the world ignore them. They did not bury this because it failed. They buried it because it worked. If that stopped you cold, hit the like button right now, because I need to know how many of you made it to this point. Drop your state in the comments below. Because in the next video, I am mapping out exact yield numbers by state. Sunflower, canola, and flax. How many gallons per acre you can press right where you live, broken down by climate zone, so you know exactly what is possible on your property with your soil. I read every single comment, and I want to know where you are. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit margin, you already know what to do next. Subscribe, because the next video is going to show you a building material that was federally defunded in 1937, the same year Agro opened its doors in Kansas. And when you find out what that material is and who killed it and why, this video is going to feel like the warm-up.